this session, we're going to learn about how readily accessible energy data can help individuals, businesses, communities unlock innovation, energy efficiency, and new clean energy technologies. Just to editorialize a little bit on that, I started out in this industry doing graduate research, academic research at the Public Utility Commission, and I was looking at one process was electric grid modernization. I think Justin was involved in that as well. And one of the big things I learned about electric grid modernization in New Hampshire is it's really about two critical things. One is access to data and information to inform how we modernize this grid with our current technologies. And the second is rate design and price signals and empowering customers with new technologies so they can change their behavior and be empowered to decarbonize and to take control of their energy systems. So I think this is really half of the grid modernization piece here is access to energy data. And New Hampshire has some real strong potential to be a leader in making that accessible to the market, to customers, to businesses, partnering with utilities to bring us into the 21st century energy future. So with that, let's see, I had one other little remark I wanted to share. I'll just sort of note that a couple of themes we're going to touch on, I think, and I'm sure there'll be others, but grid modernization I talked about, retail markets and how customers and businesses can have more competitive options if they have more access to data. Collaboration with public-private, utility, nonprofit, and decarbonization as well. And I'm going to quote Don Kreis. I'm sure we'll get lots of great quotes from him. But Don said of this policy process, the settlement agreement is one of the best examples of utilities and other stakeholders collaborating and coming together to hammer out a really good consensus. So I'm excited about this opportunity for the state. I think it's one of the policies that have the potential to do the most good. And glad to dig into some of the details. And with that, I'm going to have our panelists just briefly introduce themselves. We have Justin Eisfeller, who's Vice President of Information Technologies at Unitil.
Good afternoon. Okay.
You can just say hello, actually. Let's do that.
Hello, everybody. You want me to say a little bit about myself?
Please do.
Okay. So I've been in the utility business for quite a while. Background in power engineering, close to 30 years experience in the industry, and have been involved in our grid modernization efforts for going better on a dozen years. And data sharing and data granularity has been part of that effort. And the systems that provide that data have been part of my experience at Unitil, deploying systems that basically gather data on a less than a second basis, all the way up to daily data. Sharing that data is something that we've been talking about for many years related to grid modernization, and we've been progressing with those efforts since then. And I think these efforts that you're going to hear about today are sort of the culmination of that. It's becoming much easier to share data. The approach that we're looking to take here, I think, will expedite the sharing of data.
Thank you, Justin. Thanks for being here. We also have Ethan Goldman with Resilient Edge, who is a consultant to Clean Energy New Hampshire throughout this process. Ethan, you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So I've been creating energy data analytics software for more than 10 years, primarily supporting energy efficiency and demand flexibility programs. I worked at the EIC for almost a decade, supporting Efficiency Vermont and working on a statewide energy data platform there. And really the focus for efficiency and other energy service providers is how do we do something useful with the data that actually helps customers make better decisions and demonstrate to the stakeholders that the investments that we're making are actually worthwhile, so that we can make the best investments possible and decarbonize the grid quickly. So now I work, my company is called Resilient Edge. We work with clients all around the world doing similar things, lots of problems to solve these days, and really excited to see what New Hampshire is working on.
Also, we have Don Kreis, the consumer advocate. And go ahead, Don, if you have anything you want to share.
I do. Hi, everybody. You already heard how good looking I am, so I will not dwell on that. I was going to say something funny, but then I decided to say something serious. So this is serious. Here's why I'm obsessed with data. I am the father of a 20-year-old college student who has cystic fibrosis. That is a serious, life-shortening disease. Had I been born with cystic fibrosis, I would be, I think, about 50 years dead. My daughter, nevertheless, is super healthy. Why is that? Well, one big reason is that in 1960-something or other, the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation started a national CF patient data registry. They keep track of every single cystic fibrosis patient in the country, and the best practices that emerge from that data are one of the major reasons that that disease is well on the way to being a fully controllable medical condition, if not cured outright. Now, that kind of data is very intimate and personal, but it's also very powerful. And I started to realize that we can do the same kind of powerful things with energy-related customer usage data, which is not as intimate as your health data in your healthcare file. So I'm just really convinced, as the state's ratepayer advocate, that there is no more important work for me to do than to make sure that the data flows as freely and as effectively as possible.
Thank you, Don. We also have Representative Kat McGhee from the State House and the Science, Tech, and Energy Committee, who was very involved in the docket process as well.
Thank you, Henry. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all. It's a long day, a lot of good things going on. As Henry said, I serve on House Science, Technology, and Energy, and in my first term, I'm a technology program manager by trade, so I kind of bring that perspective to the job. Was very interested in energy policy, wanted a seat at that table. And in my first term in the House, a bill came to me from actually Don's office. It came, I was a co-sponsor on the bill with one of the senators who had asked me to sign on to it for a statewide energy data platform. And when it came over to the House and required a subcommittee, I learned that when you're a state rep in the state of New Hampshire, you can define the job. So it's whatever you want it to be. And so I was asked to chair a subcommittee because there were open issues on the bill, a lack of sufficient understanding around what we were trying to achieve. And so I went to the source who had helped write the bill from the OCA and talked with him for a while about what we were trying to achieve. And because I had a background, which is kind of unusual in the legislature, in technology projects, I was kind of the right person to try and bridge the gap between the various constituencies that were working on the subcommittee to figure out whether the bill would go forward. And what ended up happening was part of the bill passing and being signed into law was that it was going to have an adjudicative proceeding over at the Public Utilities Commission. And what I realized at that point was there was nobody involved from the state's perspective or from a technical perspective that was going to follow the bill over there and kind of shepherd it through or just represent that perspective. And what I was learning throughout my first term as a state rep is that it's providing those perspectives that make the best bills. So, so I worked with these lovely people over once COVID happened and on a long stakeholder process, and you'll be hearing more about that. But so my background basically is in technology, software, not as an engineer, but as a program manager, so a project manager type role. That's that.
And yeah, thank you, Representative McGhee. My previous role at Clean Energy New Hampshire, I was somewhat involved in this docket process until I moved on to other business halfway through, but I got a little bit of an inside peek at the process as well, so I'll try to share some of that as we go. And there's a couple of sections we've sort of outlined here. We're going to do fast takes, which is each of the panelists is going to have less than 60 seconds, no more, to say why this matters to their organization, why the audience, and why the state should care. And then we're going to have each panelist pitch us a user story, an example of how this could be used for an energy customer or an energy business or a municipality or whatever they've chosen, to help us sort of paint a picture of what is this going to change and what is this going to be like if we have an energy data hub that can seamlessly make accessible our energy data. And Justin, I'm going to allow you to kick us off here with the why question. Timer starts now.
Okay, why? So I mentioned earlier that data sharing has been a progression for Unitil. If you are a customer of Unitil now, you can get access to interval data, you can get access to your daily read data, you can get access to your billing data, but it's basically, it's a very basic format, and it's very difficult for you to share that with other parties. So there's some limitations to sharing of that data. So this is important to us because it's a progression of our ability to share. It's also a major component of our enabling platform that we're building that will enable proliferation of distributed energy resources. So part of our efforts have been to build systems that can manage the future grid, and a big part of that is data that we share with customers, data that they may share with us, data that we share with third parties and other service providers. So this is a big component of that.
Nailed it. Well, you were 4 seconds over, but very well.
And then
No,
we want
it's,
user story as well.
oh, we're gonna do that after. I
Okay.
think. We're gonna do whys
Different
first, and
segment.
then, yeah, so you can take a break, but, I'm really glad to hear you talk about the integration of distributed energy resources, because that's a perspective that I very much carry, so thanks for sharing that. Ethan, I'm gonna turn it over to you for the why.
Great. Well, I think some people think energy data is kind of boring. It seems like it's about the past. It's like what happened back in a billing cycle somewhere, and it seems kind of dull. But in fact, it's actually about the future, right? The reason that data matters is that we're trying to understand how to plan for the future, how to forecast what's going to happen so that we can make good decisions. And previously, that was primarily a concern of the utility, right? We all used power when we wanted to use power, and the utility was responsible for making sure it was there when we needed it. So they had the data they needed to do planning. Now we're moving to this distributed energy grid, and lots of people are going to be responsible for shaping their load and deciding what to invest in putting on for generation and storage and controls. And not just individuals, but all the aggregators and the whole ecosystem there, everyone needs to be involved in making good decisions, and those decisions all need to line up and give the same answer universally so that we all have the same grid and it all works the right way and minimizes costs, and that's why data is so important.
Thank you, Ethan. Don, do you want to share your why in 60 seconds?
Sure, I hope I'll take even less than 60 seconds. So present company accepted. I think almost everybody doesn't want to think every day about energy all day, but they do want to actively manage their usage of energy so that they can save money and save civilization. So obviously the key is getting third parties involved, and those third parties who are going to provide those services to customers, they need those customers' data, and they also need the data of the neighboring customers, and they need access to that data in order to do their stuff effectively, quickly, reliably, and consistently. That is what this data platform that we're talking about here is going to do, and that's why I'm excited about it. Less than 60 seconds, yes?
Yes, sir. And Representative McGee.
Yes, thank you. So you've already heard some of the issues about why we need it as a tool, right? It's going to take us to the next level in terms of management. And we're also looking at, fully realizing what deregulation meant in terms of having more distributed energy, more local control. And we're going to have the tools to actually take that to the next level. We may not know what that level is, but it's an enabling tool. And so from my perspective, even as we went through the process, we found that we had stakeholders that were intervening from out of state because they were so interested in what New Hampshire was trying to do. And that was because we had looked at the fact that we have, disparate energy sources and different utilities, different perspectives, different data sets. And the idea was, how do you bring that all together so that we can simply pull the data, use the data? You have to come up with a standard data model. You have to get everybody on board. So that was, that's my, what is it about this that the state benefits from? And that is that we will now be able to provide those insights through a tool that will allow us to go wherever we want to go. And individuals and towns and aggregators will also be able to get the data that they need far more easily than they can today. Ta-da.
Fantastic. Okay, and we're gonna have one more fast take, and that's gonna be our user story to sort of set the ground of what are the things that this is gonna enable, and we're gonna just go down the line as we did before. Sorry, Justin.
So I'll build a little bit on what Kat just said. My user story is sort of a manual use case. We have customers that have both gas and electric accounts, may have multiple accounts in our service territory, and they've asked us for a summarized report every month that provides their consolidated usage information, both gas and electric, and that's a very manual effort for us. Or it's a very manual effort for them. They can get to that information on our site, it's not consolidated anywhere for them in a report format. So we provide that. It's done very manually. It's labor intensive and it's delayed, right? They don't get it when they want it necessarily. The platform will allow them to pull that information themselves and by design pull data from multiple utilities and consolidate it in a user format that's easy to use and easy to read. In addition to that, since it's API based, they can build systems off of that. And so they could automatically share that with their accounting systems or whatever it may be, because it's basically a system-based approach.
So that's, I just want to follow up a tiny bit actually, so I make sure I'm understanding. So a user could go into this data platform once it's constructed, click of a button, they could get their Eversource electric and then their Unitil gas, if that's the
Correct.
territory they're in, one report consolidated
Correct.
like that.
And they have a choice of either a stylized report format that basically presents it summarized, or as raw data, which they can input right into a system.
Gotcha.
Since it's an API, they can have it systematically pulled from a system within their corporate structure.
So not a PDF, but just real data, usable,
Correct.
plugging in.
Real data that they can use instantly.
Perfect. I'm going to go to Ethan for his user story.
Sure, great. So I'm going to talk about another kind of consolidated data that is exciting to me about this platform, which I think is pretty unusual in terms of what I've seen from other similar utility data system designs across the country, which is the ability to aggregate data across an entire community. And that's particularly exciting here in New Hampshire. As you've heard earlier today, there's a lot of action going on around how communities can get more involved in helping to invest in the energy and take control of the energy supply within their communities to lower costs and reduce carbon emissions and all the other goals they have. How do you make those plans and make those decisions about investments and motivate all of the folks within your community to support this effort if you can't actually back it up with real data? And so that's one of the user stories we have, is the ability to provide aggregated data at a community level, which, by the way, sometimes crosses utility boundaries and so has huge challenges now, and do it in a consistent way so that whatever analysis you're doing can be replicated, so the community can not only plan, but then can track and see whether they're actually accomplishing what they thought they would.
Well done. I like it. So from the individual to the full community scale, 2 great user stories, and on to Don Kreis.
Cool. Well, you already heard that I'm obsessed with third parties. So in that spirit, and first of all, let me say that the guy sitting to my right and your left is the god of use cases and user stories. He took like a lot of technical language about what we could do with this platform and massaged them into these really compelling user stories. So here's my variation on one of his themes. Maybe some of you know I'm obsessed with cooperatives. New Hampshire has an excellent consumer cooperative statute. So you and your neighbors could form a consumer cooperative, and that consumer cooperative might want to know how much its members' energy is costing them, so that that cooperative could offer its members time of use rates or maybe even real-time pricing at different times of the day. And then that entity, and I guess it doesn't have to be a cooperative, needs to bill everybody accurately, and then it needs to take that data and buy energy on the wholesale market, or maybe make some of it itself, and help everybody reduce their energy usage at the right times of the day. And then those costs that result can then be distributed equitably among all the members of the co-op in a way that just creates a lot of good that doesn't exist today.
Thank you, Don.
Very good.
Last but not least.
Yes, well, actually, Don referred to Ethan's brilliance on helping us with user stories. The reason all of us can speak fairly compellingly about what it can do is because the process, the stakeholder process, actually led us to define which our primary use case stories would be in the initial product, and where we would be able to go from there. There was a little bit of disagreement between different stakeholders. You know, the utilities had a different idea about what the product would do than some of the other folks who were involved. And so we came to a point where we understood that there would be, you know, individual aggregation, individual data management, and then you have to be able to slice the data to whatever constituency you are trying to illustrate. So in my community, we have the Hollis Energy Committee, and for years they have been going in front of the Board of Selectmen and trying to explain to them why all of the savings that we've been realizing from the investments we made in converting our police station and our town hall to pellet burners that receive RECs, and you know, all of this stuff that we're investing in for qualified DER around the state is disparate at this point. It's you can't touch it, you can't pull it together. So in my community, I looked at the use case where we can build an aggregation for the plants that we're interested in. We have solar panels on the schools, so we would be able to slice the data in a way that we could meaningfully illustrate for those folks who have, again, no interest in energy data but want to understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, how it's affecting the town, and whether it, you know, it was a great investment. You'll be able to make all of those compelling arguments from the data you'll be able to pull together.
So you all convinced me this is going to be really good for the state and for the industry, for the individual, for the communities, for the energy committees. So I'm excited. I'm ready for it to happen, but I want to be clear with the audience. We haven't constructed a data platform yet. This has gone through it was a law that went through the State House. It was signed by the governor. It said we're going to send this to the Public Utility Commission, have a process. They had a regulatory process. The stakeholders got together. They hashed out this settlement agreement, and they agreed we want to move forward with constructing this energy data hub or energy data platform. And then there was a restructuring, and the Department of Energy was created, and we are awaiting an order from the Public Utility Commission on approving that settlement agreement, or ruling on that settlement agreement. And after that point in time, then hopefully we'll go and build this thing that's going to be great for all of us. So just a little context for the audience, and I want to talk about that a little bit, but before I do, it's just sort of the next section of this presentation. That was excellent fast takes. I think we're all a little warmed up. I'm really going to encourage you to make this as much a dialogue as you can. You know, don't just, I won't jump in between each thing. If you want to, engage with one another and pass the mic back and forth as you please. I think we're all, we work together a lot and we can have a fun conversation. But maybe talk a little bit. I'll kick off by asking about that process piece. And I think I'm going to ask you, Dawn, to start us on this. Did I articulate that correctly as to where we stand now, and really what needs to happen next to make this a reality so we can achieve all those great energy user stories for everyone?
The PUC needs to issue its goddamn order.
How do we get the PUC to do that?
I do not know. If every single person in this room is not absolutely outraged by the failure of this state's Public Utilities Commission to do its job, which means issue orders in important dockets, then you aren't paying attention. This is a serious problem, and let me tell you, I do not criticize the PUC in this state lightly, because my job is usually to charm the PUC, and I'm serious. But I simply cannot abide a regulatory commission that is paid for by the state's ratepayers that refuses to issue orders on important dockets. That simply is not acceptable to me, and it should not be acceptable to any of you. Now, meanwhile, I refuse to sit around and wait for that order. So the settlement agreement, let me get a little positive now. The settlement agreement that we worked so hard to develop very successfully contains a roadmap for moving the data platform forward. So my current task is to convince my fellow stakeholders, fellow settlement signatories, to move forward as if we already have the approval of the PUC. So that's my vision for how to move forward. I agreed to, so the platform is supposed to be governed by a platform governance council. And my idea, and my fellow panelists can tell me why this is a bad idea if they want, but my idea is I've already drafted bylaws, as I said I would, for the governance council, and I'd like to launch the governance council. That's my prescription.
Could you just tell us why the PUC is dragging its feet?
No.
You would have to ask them.
And I'm curious if the other panelists, maybe Justin or anyone else, do you agree with Dawn? Are you concerned that there's a holdup? Do you think the next course of action of moving together with the stakeholders on the governance council is appropriate? What do you think?
I don't have any big issues moving forward with the governance council. Detail, paperwork, process, all that needs to be done. There's really no harm in that.
It's hard for you to spend money, perhaps, as a utility.
Yeah, that's the tough part,
Yeah.
is building things. We really shouldn't build anything or even scope anything until we have an order in hand. Otherwise, we're likely to design and build the wrong thing, perhaps.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't think we should expect the utilities to incur costs that they might not be able to recover on. But the Executive Council is meeting this coming Wednesday, I believe, and it is rumored that the governor intends to nominate somebody to fill the third seat on the PUC. That means executive councilors are going to be thinking about the PUC over the next 3 or 4 weeks. So you should all be calling your member of the Executive Council because they have the ability to pressure the PUC to do its job.
Do Ethan or Kat want to?
I wanted to say something because there was a bit of a fly in the ointment here. Well, there have been several flies in the ointment. Actually, we had changeover at the PUC, and then we also had in the budget trailer bill in the last cycle, there was 80 pages thrown in for the new Department of Energy, which was formulated. And in that language, there is some, I don't want to say ambiguity, but some of the language gives roles that seem to be at cross purposes between the DOE and the PUC. And so the Public Utilities Commission is a regulatory body, and they have always been separate, well, as long as I've been aware, they've been separate and distinct and had their own organization, their own resources, their own researchers and attorneys. And now the resources are moved into this DOE department that's coming up, and that's a little bit of a black box. Nobody had really a lot of input on that. It was kind of just thrust out there, put into law, signed in, done. And it does appear that the statewide energy data platform is in the language. So they inserted this particular project, which was pending at the Public Utilities Commission and had already had, we all testified, a harrowing day where we all came together in our settlement agreement. And we were all, everybody was vehemently, violently in favor of moving forward. But what happens whenever a group of people actually get together with different perspectives and work themselves towards something that comes out really great, we were all clear as truth, right? This is terrific. We convinced the PUC commissioners. The commissioner that was the most convinced was up at the end of June and was not renewed, so she's not there to make the decision anymore. And my fear is that new players are being appointed, and many of them are political in nature. They're not really energy experts, which is of concern to me initially. But the second thing is they have no knowledge of this project. And so how are they going to get that knowledge of the project? How are they going to understand the value of the project? They're not in this room. They may not see this tape. So my fear is that the way that something innovative will be derailed is that the process that we all underwent together in order to understand the value of what we were doing is lost on the people who are going to make the decision about the fate of the hub.
So this is really interesting. It's a couple of things I want to draw out of that. So one is this process, as described by some of the panelists and from firsthand I experienced, was more collaborative than many of the docket processes we see. We had a lot of stakeholder conversations. It was hard work, took a lot of time and energy, but we had folks like Justin from Unitil and folks like Ethan from New Hampshire, and everyone coming together and hashing out some of the hard decisions and buying into this energy data platform. So there was a lot of stakeholder buy-in, which is one of the things that gives me hope for its success. And then there seems to be a gap on, maybe some of the commissioners are new and they weren't necessarily involved, and there needs to be some communication to help them understand that. And I wonder, is that a need that I'm hearing correctly? Is there a need to communicate to the commissioners the importance of this from this broad stakeholder group? Because, and I want to note a couple of things. So Governor Sununu did sign the law in 2019 that put this forward to the Public Utility Commission, so I think there has been some bipartisan support on it. But is that a gap I'm hearing correctly? Is that the lack of understanding from the commissioners and a need to communicate to them, or is all the information in the record?
So we're just going to nod and say yes.
Probably.
I have just one thing to add to that with the governor.
Yeah.
The governor just was in the paper because he signed a proclamation for Clean Energy Week for the state of New Hampshire because it's a national thing, and had some folks around him from the House. But he was interviewed in the little article that was there about Clean Energy Week, and he listed municipal net metering and community power as the innovation that New Hampshire is working on. So he didn't mention he doesn't, this is not on his radar in the way that it should be in order to have support. That's
So
the first thing I thought, is like,
Needs
why
to
is
be
he mentioning
elevated.
innovation when
Needs
he's,
to
yeah,
be elevated in some fashion.
Yeah.
So the folks at the top can
yeah.
understand the critical importance of it, perhaps.
You know, the thing is that, like, if you sue each other, and then you come to an agreement and say, hey, judge, you know, we've resolved our lawsuit, here's our settlement agreement. The judge is just like always ready to like, yes, go ahead.
Stamp it, yeah.
But we did that in the energy efficiency realm last December and presented it to the PUC, and the PUC has refused to issue its order for more than 9 months now. And the data platform is in exactly the same position. It was presented unanimously to the commission by every party to this adjudicative proceeding, and it was placed under advisement to the commission in May. So my position as a lawyer is I don't care what happened on July 1. I don't care that the governor signed the bill creating the Department of Energy. I don't care that there are different commissioners. The law that existed when this was submitted to the commission inexorably led to its approval. And so I think as a matter of law, the constituency that I represented is entitled to an order saying, go forward, because the settlement agreement doesn't say, all right, now the data platform happens. It sets up a process. It creates a governance council, and the governance council's first task is to really try to figure out, well, what is this thing going to cost? Because there's another phase that's set out in the statute that says that the commission has to determine whether the platform is basically too expensive to build. So we need to figure that out. So the PUC needs to authorize everybody to take those steps, because Justin and his employer are right. They shouldn't be expected to do stuff that they're not going to get paid to do, because they're not a charity.
I have another question, but I think Ethan, yeah.
Well, I have a confession to make that maybe seems a little embarrassing in the light of the current conversation, which is that I'm an optimist. And so I would like to think that if we keep moving forward with something that has value, and there are lots of opportunities for the utilities, even without crossing the lines that Justin, and I'm sure his colleagues at the other utilities would be concerned about in terms of cost recovery, could still be well within the scope of the types of customer services that they provide today, and accomplish some of the key things that we are seeking to do by standardizing across all the utilities in New Hampshire, by giving some kind of predictability for energy service providers, for customers, for policy folks in communities, whoever is trying to figure out what should they be building and what are they going to be able to count on in terms of data. And so we can deliver some short-term benefits, we can communicate some long-term roadmaps for where we see this going, and the policy stuff, challenging though it is, hopefully will eventually work itself out, and we can help that along by continuing to provide this positive picture that gets more folks excited who could be using the platform to call their representatives and try to move this thing along.
So a couple.
I'll add one to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So one of the interesting things that's happening is that there's other states and other utilities that become interested in what we've done already. And it may be possible that the states around us move quicker than we do. There's been some discussion in Maine already. They passed a law.
Their law was modeled after our law.
Yeah, I somehow think someone had something to do with that.
They called me.
And Massachusetts, they just, in the recent Eversource case, required them to do a very similar stakeholder review on data sharing. And so they were heavily engaged in our process here. It would be my objective to use the same platform approach in both states. And realistically, that is the design that we put forth, is the API approach. It can be easily multi-state. It can even have slightly different data components and still work very well sharing across multi-states. We've had interest from other regions of the country as well in what we've done here in New Hampshire, our proposed. And I think it would be a great thing if the design and the approach that we put forth gets traction elsewhere, and maybe we'll find that they move quicker than we do. I don't know.
So I think a couple of things I want to pull out of this. There's there seems to be this potential for New Hampshire to maybe be a national leader here. Other states have taken an interest, they've taken a look and said, what you're doing is really innovative. Statewide data platform integrates all the utilities, makes it accessible to customers. There's a communication gap where maybe some commissioners or leaders need to be more informed about the importance of this, and that's part of the story that I think we're gonna tell this group and hopefully maybe try to tell them as one potential path forward. But do I have that right? So this is something that's putting Unitil on the map and the state is on the map as potentially.
That's not really our goal, but I think it's getting interest. Yeah, we've gotten phone calls from mid-Atlantic utilities that are in a similar process, and they're interested in three things. Our design, the API approach, and how it differs from a central database approach, the pros and cons of that.
And is that that's more of a distributed model of data
It's a
sharing?
distributed model, yeah.
Okay.
The approach that we put forth is distributed. The fact that we're building a hub that allows different utilities to use a similar API, doesn't even have to be the exact same API, to combine data and share it. And then also the collaborative process. They're very interested in how we reach compromise, how the process went in New Hampshire, how they might be able to reach a similar consensus. So the process they were interested in as well. So we've been getting phone calls from them and having meetings, technical sessions actually with them on what that, what the design looks like and how it would work.
So that's all so positive, right? Because we in New Hampshire, we're so used to being the laggard, the regional outlier, the people who don't see the future the way our neighbors do. But it turns out that in this context, we are perfectly positioned. Why? Because we're a small-ish state. So, in a huge state like even Massachusetts or New York, God forbid, this would be so complicated because there would be so many people involved. But also, we're not so small. We have numerous utilities, and so the advantages of a statewide data platform become obvious in a state that's our size. And because we're a small state, everybody knows everybody else, and so there's you can build trust and collaboration really easily. And that happened here. This is the most inspiring thing I've gotten to do since I became consumer advocate 5 years ago. So even though I started out with some pretty angry words about the PUC, this is really my happy place.
And cupcakes, so.
Oh, and cupcakes. And by the way, you all should, if any of you know anybody who lives in Hollis, you should call them and tell them to make Kat McGee legislator for life. Why? She took this bill that originated in our office. So let me just say, I went to Senator Fuller Clark to introduce the bill. Why did I do that? Because I missed the deadline for introducing bills in the House. So my only choice was the Senate. So I go to Senator Fuller Clark, and I gave her a draft of the bill, and she got it introduced. She had the wisdom to get Kat to be a co-sponsor, and then the bill was going to die in House ST&E till this excellent legislator rescued it from oblivion. So if this thing moves forward, and I'm committed to making sure it happens, we will have Kat to thank.
They basically told me this is gonna die, and I was like, it's the first thing I've been asked to do. And then I went and investigated and found out it was really a good thing. I was gonna say something about about how the process of how this worked too. I don't know if I have time to just say.
Please do.
Yeah, I think I'm looking at Justin, and my mind's going blank. The way that the product that we put together, the product we defined, the reason other people are interested in it is that we didn't start from scratch. We took the lessons of other people who've tried it and had problems. We started with the lessons that other states had already learned. And we also started with existing data standards that we incorporated, so we weren't reinventing the wheel, we weren't trying to do something different. If we did something as a state, we wanted to make sure it could scale to the national level, that we weren't gonna really shoot ourselves in the foot with the way we designed it. So I think, having been involved in a lot of software projects, I would say we started in a good place, and then we all had similar intent, although we may have had different perspectives in terms of trying to define the outcomes that we were trying to reach, which ones could we live with, which ones made sense. We had security concerns, cost concerns, there were concerns that kept coming up again and again in the process, but we worked through them. and said, well, we don't have to have all the answers. In fact, what you should understand up front is you can't do anything innovative and think that you understand the end, right? You have to have faith that if you clarify with everyone involved as you go along, that the process will have a decent outcome. And that's where we landed, I think, is that we did keep striving for that understanding, and as each problem arose in the process, we dealt with it, and we were honest with each other too, which was interesting. It was definitely fun working with all the utilities, because they even had, different representatives and different perspectives, and I think it always does come down to, are the people all aligned? So it may be the right thing to do, and it may be terrific, and other people may be thinking it's great, but we still have to keep working the people that are going to be involved in whether it goes forward.
That's so important. I think, you would think that with lots of money involved in the future of the state and lots of technical issues and all of that, big publicly traded companies, you wouldn't think that this is true, but it is. The people really matter, like actual human beings getting to know each other and learning how to trust each other and what their respective capabilities are, how much good faith there is.
I feel all warm and fuzzy. This is such a nice moment.
It wasn't that easy.
I just want to put, so I know this is a policy session, somehow Henry talked me into being the policy session, I think by putting the word data in the title. And I'm guessing there may be some of my fellow data geeks out here in the room, and maybe some of you didn't read like all 138 pages of our settlement, and so I thought it might be helpful to give you a high-level technical description of what this amazing thing is that you're all waiting for.
Next question.
Good segue.
So I think maybe an easy way of describing what we're talking about, Justin described the API of APIs, we've talked about this hub and a distributed system. So we're talking about a standard interface for customers and third parties to be able to request data and then get it back. And the idea of the hub is that instead of having to know, oh, I need to ask this utility for this piece of information and that utility for that piece of information, that there's one central integration point that you can go. And the concept, as advertised in the bill, was a statewide data platform. And so what that needs to mean, for actual users of the platform, is there's one point of a contact, right? One place you can go to find all your answers. And then that hub will be able to route your question to the right authority who maintains the system of record. That will give a standard response that will then get aggregated back into your results that you can use, right? So that's the sort of mechanism there. That's the data hub, which has lots of individual pieces that we still have to work out the details of. And then the other process, the other part of it is the council, which is just a collaborative stakeholder process to sort of continue the good work we were doing in the negotiation so far, to continue working out all the technical details. Because one of the interesting conflicts between the policy process, where you're supposed to have an answer and an agreement, and everything's all worked out and signed, and then you go and do it forever, is it doesn't really match with technology. Anyone here who's built technology before knows that if you think you're going to design everything that you're going to use for the next 10 years, write it down, and then just go build it and never look back. Yeah, good luck.
Yeah, so this is an example of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, right? Like, is it a particle, is it a wave? Well, in this case, is it a sort of legal process, or is it a technical process? And the techies, like people like her and him, like they thought, oh, this is an IT project. Me, I'm a lawyer. Like, no, this is a legal process. It's an adjudicative proceeding at the PUC. We have to develop the right policy and, figure out what the framework is and get the right governance principles in place. So I think both of those things went forward. But don't ask, is it a particle or is it a wave? Because as soon as it's one thing, it looks like the other.
And maybe we can just take a minute on the governance council and talk about what exactly that is and who has a seat and how that's going to work. Because maybe, Don, are you the best person to sort of pitch that?
Well, maybe. I mean, the key is, all right, so the utilities are in charge of administering the data platform. They will probably have to hire a third-party contractor to build it, meaning the hub. But at the risk of annoying Justin and any other utility employees here, I'll say, my imperative was to make sure that there was adult supervision, meaning I didn't want to just let the utilities do whatever they wanted. So there needed to be this governance body in place that would make sure that the utilities didn't get to do whatever they wanted, but also the utilities needed to be represented to make sure that their interests were maintained. The utilities care about their customers, they care about their shareholders, they care about the integrity of their systems, they're obsessed with cybersecurity, as they should be, and so they have a lot of interest to protect. So basically, they have seats on the governance platform, other stakeholders do, my office is represented, so it'll either be me or somebody I designate, and the agreement that we made is that we would basically work by consensus. So we're not going to take votes and say, well, this policy passed by an 8-6 vote. We're not going to, there's not going to be a majority view that will be shoved down the throats of the minority. There'll be consensus, and when there isn't consensus, then if something is important enough, a dissatisfied party can ask the PUC to decide. So that's the basic governance framework, and the first task of the Governance Council will be to develop terms for an can't remember if it's an RFP or an RFI.
Starts RFI.
RFI, and so that will get put out there to contractors, and the idea is to get a sense of, like, what will this really cost?
And there's just I think Clean Energy New Hampshire has a seat on the council, as does their municipal seat. I believe Clifton Below is in the audience, and are you represented on the council?
Yeah.
And then commercial sector, a couple of other seats.
The academic community, because it turns out this is important to the academic community, right? Because people, like, you saw Elizabeth Wilson this morning. Well, what does her institute do? It needs data in order to do its research and thinking so that it can propose great new policies that will carry the world into the next century without ruining the planet. Well, we need data, so the academic community has a key interest.
So I have a couple other questions, and then we're going to have the audience jump in. I think a couple people have kind of had some questions. I'm glad you're thinking about it and take some notes, and we'll get to that in a second. What about infrastructure? So not all, I believe Unitil has advanced metering infrastructure. You have smart meters that can collect at an interval basis. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that, but not all the state's utilities do. I know that Eversource, for example, has meters that are read once a month by radio, a drive-by truck. Is that an important piece of this? Is this all gonna, do we need to upgrade our infrastructure in order for the data hub to be useful?
You want me to start?
Sure.
So, more data is always better, being a technical guy. Our automated metering infrastructure is going through an iteration right now. So our previous system was a daily read system. It did have two-way communications, and we could provide daily reads. You could break down those reads into time of use segments, into 4 different segments, so you could provide some granularity of usage. The next generation of that is interval-based, 15-minute interval-based data. It's provided multiple times a day. There's other aspects of that. There's power quality and outage management aspects of both systems, both generations that I won't go into. But the interval data provides customers 15-minute usage information, both watts and bars, which is useful to see what you're using on an hourly basis, or to participate in markets or whatever it may be. That data will be served up as it comes in, so it'll flow right over to and be available for the platform to pull from by API. And those meters, that the infrastructure is already installed, and the meters are rolling out. We're offering those 15-minute interval type meters to all the customers with the newer rates, the time of use rates we're proposing in our recent rate case. And so the idea is that we'll migrate from the older daily read technologies, which are pretty capable, to the newer, more capable system. The platform will support all that. Our back-end office systems are already built to support all that. And so this should happen very quickly. That's not the case everywhere. All the utilities have different progression of technology and different approaches really to doing produce similar outcomes. Eversource has an AMR-based system, which is capable, but it is still a monthly read system. And they'll be migrating to AMI here now. I think they've announced that. They've gone off after time of use and other demand management approaches with different approaches, and there are different approaches. But as we all migrate to the same set of data, it'll make the analysis easier. It'll make the platform more useful. But there's definitely plenty of use in the platform now. You can get the monthly reads, you can get your usage reads, you can combine data, all that can be used right now. And all of us now, even before AMI, have interval-based reads. Eversource does, their large customers have interval-based reads. All of ours do, of course. So I think it's only going to get better.
You know, one elephant in the living room is that we've been talking about this as the so-called statewide data platform, but unfortunately, in order to get the bill through the legislature, I had to agree to make this optional to the New Hampshire Electric Co-op, which does have advanced metering, and you know, you've heard, like I heard, just listened to Brian Kalman from the co-op talk about the cool things that his folks are doing at the co-op. If you happen to be a member of the electric co-op, you might call the co-op and tell them they should opt into this because we could use their participation and they need this.
And it'd be pretty easy for them to adopt it with the systems that they have.
Fantastic.
And I mean, in terms of the, like, when is the right time, in terms of the technology, the simple answer is the best time to build this platform was 10 years ago, and the second best time is now. And the technology isn't going to stop and get to the best place when it stops moving and we can then build the platform around it. Look, smart meters 2.0 are in progress now, right? There are utilities around the country that are replacing their old smart meters with new smart meters that have onboard computing capabilities so they can do load disaggregation with megahertz sampling. Should we wait for that? No, right? This stuff is going to keep changing continuously. The point of getting a platform in place is as soon as possible, have a place where this can all be standardized and we can simplify the process of making it easy for people to request the data and get it in a standardized fashion. And the sooner we do that, the easier it's going to be to deal with new things that come down the pike and to help deal with the fact that it's going to get more and more diverse between the different types of meters at the different utilities. Look, we haven't even started talking about the other players in the room, right? This is not just a one-way flow of communication, right? This is a distributed grid with two-way energy flows. Well, this is a distributed platform with two-way data flows, right? And so the utilities, yeah, this makes their life a little bit easier to have a standard way to get data out there. But what they really need is, you know, I see my utility friends on Twitter going, why the hell don't we know where all the solar and battery is on the grid? How come we can't integrate this into our planning and analysis processes? Like we're completely blind to all this stuff going on. We need to have that data flowing back in the other direction, right? And so that technology is changing too. So the fact that technology is changing fast is why we need this sooner.
Well said. I'm going to go ahead and open it up to audience questions. And oh, there's a lot. So we're going to go with Matt, and then you, sir, and you, sir. And yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Matt Miller and Pembroke. I do have a lot of questions because I have so many gaps in my understanding. I know I don't have time. Let me ask a couple to just, maybe this will just illustrate, you know, you can connect a few dots for me. So a first question is, in your process of figuring this thing out, have you gotten to topics like data ownership and the rights and, you know, which entity will have the right to certain data?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, is
Yes.
it solved? I mean,
So, well, can I just, I have a real issue with data ownership as a concept, right? If you take my car, I don't have a car anymore. But if I give you a copy of my data, I still have my data. So data ownership is not helpful. It gets us into these ridiculous conflicts over who owns the data. Data rights. Data rights is much easier, right? The data is about a transaction between the utility and the customer. So the utility and the customer both inherently have rights to that data. They can also delegate those rights to other people who support them. There are ways of providing the rights in, you know, if you aggregate and anonymize it, maybe other people could have rights to it. It's a much more broad question. So ownership, I understand where the question's coming from.
yeah, I'm using words that I'm familiar with.
Which is fine, but I'm reacting to it because it's always taken us down this path of just getting into arguments that are completely unnecessary because there's solutions that satisfy way more of these problems if we frame it as rights.
Okay.
So we talked about the different flavors of the data and what types of data should be treated differently for privacy and security and that type of
So,
thing.
okay, so that the answer is you.
The public policy in New Hampshire is obsessed with consumer privacy. So this data platform will be a jealous guardian of customer privacy. And it's absolutely required in statute that any individual participation, in other words, if you want your data to go up on this platform and be shared with some third party, you have to authorize it.
Correct.
That is absolutely required in statute.
Okay, great.
And the users of that data, the third parties, for example, they're vetted. You know, their security posture, their programs, there's a vetting process, and if they fail that, if they're not a secure partner,
Yeah.
then they can't participate.
Okay,
So
excellent,
there's
thanks.
that as well.
Another question, this will be, I will only ask this other question and the other folks can ask. I heard various things about, who would be building parks and things like that, so I wasn't clear on, I'm gonna use own again, but does somebody own the platform park that they're gonna build? Does someone else own a, like building a data store? Someone else is gonna be owning the API.
These are the right questions, because these are the ones we grappled with. These are the ones that we went back and forth and batted for a long time. When we were initially working on the bill,
Yeah.
we recognized the fact that there was no ownership in the state, right? So the
Yeah.
state is asking for a data platform in which all of the data within the state would be able to be encapsulated and used. But there was no ownership. There was no Department of Energy. There was nobody in charge of any department that would be responsible for it, which is one of the reasons I went over to the Public Utilities Commission as an intervener. I don't know that I would have done that otherwise, but I'm like, how's this gonna work? And we had conversations about putting together an entity or a 501c3 or have some type of grouping. Again, we looked at educational institutions and folks who were doing energy work around the state as maybe likely owners. So we had lots of conversations, but none of those really came to fruition. And so when this group started going through the intervening process, the way the bill was originally written, the language said that the utilities would maintain an operator.
The entire
Bill
thing,
maintain an
okay.
operator.
Well, that's not exactly true. The way the bill was originally written,
He did write it.
because I originally wrote it, it would have had the Public Utilities Commission operating the platform.
Yeah.
I got called to a meeting at which the general counsel, the executive director of the PUC were there, and the commissioner of information technology, and they looked me in the eye and said, if you keep that in the bill, we will kill this bill. And the commissioner of the Department of Information Technology pulled me aside and he said, Don, you're a customer of our department, right? Like, you depend on us for your IT needs. I said, yep. He said, do you really want us doing this? And I realized,
He was
has
correct.
Dennis Goulet, he had a point. So we were forced to change the bill. So Plan B was the utilities will build it, and I really think that to the extent there's anything to own, they will own it, but they're regulated.
But
They
but
do
throughout
have
the process,
Yeah.
we discussed the fact, I was one of the people who was pushing back against complete ownership
Yeah.
through the utilities, because I didn't think that that would have the correct framing for the people who were gonna be utilizing it, and also the transition that we're in terms of other energy generators, being involved in the system as we go forward. And also, I think where we ended up was saying that it was gonna be an agile project, and we were gonna try and figure out whether there are people who are in the utility data space who are already building, APIs and platforms like this. There were some even involved in the docket, and we had presentations, and we became aware of the world we didn't know. And so I think that's where the council is gonna take next steps to determine. Like I said, we couldn't get to the end of the process in the timeline, even with day-long technical sessions that we all attended, so long. We couldn't get to the end of the project because it's a phased and complex project. But we did have many lengthy discussions around that piece. And I think where we settled was that it didn't have to be built, but but the utilities would be responsible. People like Justin would be responsible for overseeing.
Yeah, I wanna
You know,
give Justin a chance.
Yeah, you go.
Yeah.
So what we're building is virtual.
Right.
So we're not building this huge physical monster. It's not a centralized repository store that you go to that has everything built and stored right there with warehousing and everything else behind it. That's sort of old school now. The API is going to be built, right? And then there's going to be data structures that have to be built. And there's going to have to be systems that process data and convey data and communicate data. But it's a very light application. And so it's not quite the same as most people might think of, that we're building a store with all this stuff behind it. We're building an API, we're building 3 APIs, and then a hub that combines the APIs with a single output. So it's a pretty light structure, which is good for a number of reasons. It has some limitations and
Cheaper too.
and it should be cheaper. But it's not this big store that you might be thinking of. So that's a little bit different from an ownership perspective. The utilities will have their own APIs, by the way, so there's 3 APIs that were part of this design. Those APIs could be slightly different even, because we'll reuse portions of that API in other states that might be slightly different application perhaps. So it's a very flexible approach, and doesn't require all the infrastructure that you might be thinking.
And extensible
But the it'll be a
to,
consumer interface, I guess.
Yes.
Right. I do want to give a couple of the other audience members a chance. I think you were next.
So I came here because I'm on an energy committee in Sandwich, and we want to have, you know, baseline data that they can work with and everything else. And so I was thinking EPA portfolio manager. Are you all familiar with that at all?
Yeah.
It's a way. Would this like supersede that? We wouldn't need the EPA portfolio manager. And the second part of this question is, I'm the PUC, today you have the right to go ahead and build your platform. When are we gonna see it?
So I would say that this plays a slightly different role than portfolio manager.
Okay.
And typically portfolio manager's purpose is to provide some analytics and visibility and reporting of the calculated like energy intensity per square foot and things like that.
Yeah.
And so like I've seen in Vermont, there were individual utility integrations with portfolio manager. So each utility figured out how to automate the process of pumping its data into portfolio manager for those customers that wanted a chunk of buildings, whether it's a municipality or a big commercial customer or something like that. So this isn't gonna try to replicate, I mean, I think partly to Justin's point, we're not gonna try to do everything in the hub, right? We're just gonna create a conduit by which you can get data into things like portfolio manager or the dozens of other services out there that might do similar things.
So I should still move ahead with the portfolio, trying to get the town to sign up for the
And
portfolio.
you could build an interface to the hub, and
Yeah, but-
any data that the utilities have could be ported right into that system.
But he's from Sandwich, he needs to call the co-op.
So I do want the second question though. When is this going to be built?
A couple weeks, I think.
Chris,
I could have built,
we do have a
got some
set of
portion already.
requirements though, so that's
Right.
pretty.
No, what would be the
2022,
timeline?
2023, 2026?
I could have been done.
Do we have a year, a guess? Anyone want to guess at a year?
around the time when the Red Sox next win the World Series.
Ooh.
Well, that might be
I mean,
No
I think
connection
the launch date of an integrated hub, if what we said at the beginning holds true, which is that we're not gonna be able to get the utilities to spend the money on that joint project until the PUC signs off, then that's the big question mark in the middle of all of this.
So the big to-do is make the PUC move somehow.
I mean, there's, I don't know, 12 months of work or something to launch it if things are moving well.
That's helpful.
Yeah, 12, that's what I wanted, but, and the NHEC, they're not regulated in the same way as the other 3 people, so that we have to get them to opt in.
Yep.
And actually, because they're not regulated and customer-owned, we actually have some power over them,
Yes, you do.
surprisingly enough.
I'm going to try to get 3 more questions in. I think we've got Howard, Jalem, and Peter.
Okay, Howard Callard, Rye Energy Committee. Two pieces of question. Aggregation committee data, what's available today? That's one. And related to that is, Justin, you were speaking about meters. For a commercial building, have demand charge meters, which I guess is every 15-minute intervals or something like that. Are those meters only on commercial, not residential?
Demand charges for residential customers will happen over my dead body.
Right.
And then the first part of the
But
question is,
in terms of the meter, so if we want to understand time of day usage,
Right.
any of that kind of data.
You mean, do the smart meters have the capacity to measure that? Yes, they do.
They do, yeah. But Rye, Unitil doesn't serve Rye Electric.
Eversource?
Eversource does, so they have drive-by monthly red meters. So the residential customer is gonna have a monthly red, one reading a month.
Or if there's a
Your larger
commercial-
customers, there's, you know, I'm not a rates person, but, and Dawn may be able to address this better than me, but, smaller commercial customers would not have interval-based meters. They may have a demand meter, but they don't have interval-based meters. The larger customers that are above a megawatt, they'll likely have an interval meter there. The systems that Eversource has would have that interval data available, but getting access to it is probably through a spreadsheet emailed to you, or something like that.
And
So
the
as
aggregate,
an aggregation committee, what level of data would be available both?
So in RAI, you're talking about mostly monthly red data that'd be available to you. I can't speak to
and
Eversource's
there's,
ability to provide
and I
that
think there's
data.
two phases. Pre-town meeting approval of the plan, you would receive aggregate load data by rate class, so by residential, commercial, municipal, and other rate classes, monthly groupings, aggregated. And then after you approve at town meeting, you would then receive individual customer account level data for those.
But it's largely gonna be monthly red data,
Right.
you know, a singular read for the month.
I mean, I will say, it's a reasonable expectation in the future for communities that have AMI meters, that when it's aggregated, it should be possible to get hourly or 15-minute data aggregated at the community level within those rate classes and stuff. I don't know what the timeline is on that, independent of the hub.
So in Unitil service territories, and this includes Massachusetts, we're probably around 10%, 15-minute interval data available for all those customers, because we're migrating to this second generation meter right now. And we'll continue that migration will pick up over the next 5 years as customers enroll in new rates. They'll get a new meter. So all new meters in our territories are the interval-based meter. They're read 3 times a day. That data is available, and we do have green button download capability on our website, customer engagement site, and so customers can download interval-based data already, but it's in a basic format. It's not an API type format that you can just automatically program its use and combine data. You'd have to manually combine that data, even in our territories. But you'd have more data.
I want to try to get these
Okay,
two, that was a
thank you.
good answer, yeah. I want to try to get these 2 other questions in our 7 minutes, and then maybe one more even, but I think Jaylen, you're
Yeah.
next.
So, my name is Jayla, I'm from Calpine Energy Solutions. I actually have 2 questions. I'm gonna try to condense and make it easy. The first one is, how frequently will data be uploaded onto this platform? And how will the exceptions process be managed, like before people can access it? And the second one, from a community aggregation perspective, how does this platform integrate into that one? Will customers have to, give approval to access that data? And perhaps the second question might actually fit into the first one. So I try to narrow them into 2 questions.
Someone else got the second question. I'll take the first question, though. I'll try to answer that. So the data will be available when it's read. So that the idea right now, and what's been discussed, is that as the data comes in from the field, it'll be processed, so there's processing time. And then as soon as it's available to be shared, it'll be shared. If there's missing data, I think that was your second
So
question.
the exceptions process,
Yeah, the
like errors,
exceptions.
missing, reading,
Right.
anything that.
Estimated data, I believe, will be available as well. So all the utility systems will estimate missing data. It'll be categorized as estimated, and that will be shared as well, if I recall
It's usually like
correctly.
24, 48-hour lag from reading to
Yeah.
make it through the VEE.
It'll be quicker for us for the initially read data. Our plan is the newer meters are read 3 times a day. The data comes in, it's automatically processed, so provided it passes the VEE, it's automatically shared. So it's an
It's
automatic
uploaded.
VEE. If it fails the VEE, then you have to wait for the processing, there'll be a lag. But estimated data is available in the same time frame. It's immediate. So likely you'll get data 3 times a
And
day,
it'll
there'll
be
be some
indicated
lag, but
when
it
it's
won't be
estimated.
long.
Okay.
And then there'll be some data if it's missing or it failed VEE for whatever reason, then it'll lag the process. And the process is fairly manual, so it might take a day or 2 for that to get processed.
And this will differ from utility to utility, right?
It's gonna vary by utility, yes, yeah, and their systems to a large extent, but Unitil's plan is basically to share it as it comes through.
Remember, because there's no upload step, there is no batch process that goes from the utility data store to another store. there's no
It's a
lag
poll.
for a second. So,
That's awesome.
you know, we're talking milliseconds between those two different things, so
Yeah,
there's
if
no
it's available,
additional-
you can pull it.
Yeah, so it's just that one lag. So your aggregation question, I think, was,
Yeah.
are the individual
Like, how does
customers
this impact
opt
an
in, opt out?
aggregated customer? Because I'm assuming, and I think I did read the 136 page, by the way. It was a great coffee day, but, because I'm trying to understand, like, will a user have to give approval to use their data for a specific period? Will that differ, say, for an aggregated customer? How does it impact
Yeah.
them or someone who's not in it?
So let's distinguish between the sort of third-party scenario where you've got an energy service provider who's a private company, whether they're for-profit, not-for-profit, whatever, who has a relationship with a customer and says, I'll help you do X with your energy if you give me your data, and the customer gives opt-in permission and says, yes, you can see my data, and only then can that third party see the data. That's individual, you'll be able to link it up to the address and the customer with all the information, right? Lots of, as much granularity as we have, monthly or 15-minute. In the aggregate community scenario, and I think there's also some scenarios that we've talked about for like academic purposes, we'll see where those wind up. It's not really personal customer information anymore, right? We're basically talking about the system performance over a territory. And there's rules about how big an aggregation that has to be, right? If a town has 10 homes in it, well, that's not really very anonymized, is it, right? So as long as it meets those aggregation criteria, there's no opt-out. The customer, it's not their data anymore, really. They're not being exposed to anything.
It's
But you're not
anonymized
getting
data.
customer usage data then. The aggregator's not getting that customer usage
So
data.
the aggregator, if they have a relationship with that customer, it falls in the third-party scenario. They get individual customer scenarios. They do.
Okay.
The community does not.
Peter Nelson.
Well, that all sort of came in the same realm of the questions. Part of it is, what do we do now? We have the communities here, we're trying to create their energy plans and ask aggregate data. My experience in Newmarket, we went to Eversource, I asked for 36 months of historical data, I got 12. You go back and forth, it's just the most frustrating process imaginable. I can't even imagine a modern day company not wanting to not have hundreds of people calling them, asking for one-off downloads of Excel spreadsheets. It's just beyond me that that's still the way they want to play the game. I applaud
we don't wanna do
Unitil
that.
for taking that direction. I want to talk to you. It makes so much sense to be able to just have a download of data. But at the same time, I would say now, in light of the PUCs sitting on their hands, call the utilities, make their phone ring off the hook and ask them for your aggregated data. Start there. And when they start to have to process all those phone calls and all that data manually one at a time, maybe the business light bulb will go off and they'll say, we need a better way. The other thing is part of doing the better way, from the minute I start hearing, well, the utility companies will pay for it and do it, that's where, again, the alarm bells, the consumer advocate alarm bells should be going off when you start thinking about cost recovery. This shouldn't be an expensive process to accomplish. If a whole bunch of overhead results out of this thing and comes back at the ratepayers, that becomes another political football. That's the thing I think that also needs to be addressed, clearly.
Yep. Thank you, Peter. I think you're sharing a lot of sentiments we all have. I didn't hear a question, so I'm just going to turn it back to the panelists and see if you have closing remarks while we have a minute left. I don't know if there's
Well,
anything.
it's really funny that you mentioned that on the costing piece, because this entire stakeholder process with experts who gave all kinds of time and energy all the way through the process. We had 8-hour technical sessions, multiple. People were engaged. Didn't cost a dime. Didn't cost a dime, so we now have use cases. Well, I'm saying but you get paid anyway. I mean, you got paid to participate. It was something you guys were doing. But I guess my point is, so far, the state has the opportunity to create an innovation here that will help us in myriad ways, some of which we can't even define at this point, because once we have the tool, people will start thinking of creative ways to use the tool. And so, there'll be more to come that maybe we can't envision at this point. But the fact that we've given the definition that we have, I think, and that we have something that we can hand over in an RFI, that you really would spend a lot of money if you went to a utility data company and said, we need, we want this, give us your, rather than handing them something that's so well baked as to the outcomes that we expect from it. So I think that we can do it a lot less expensively because we have put in so much upfront time to think through all of the issues that we could as a very diverse stakeholder group. And so it's going to cost something, of course, but the value, I think, is we're going to have to figure that out. But I think the value will be exponential and infinite as far as it. One of the things that we talked about was that the attribute of having a data hub was that it be extensible, right? You don't build it and it's done. You build it and then you modify it when it makes sense to modify it to accommodate whatever the future is, whatever the future of our energy markets look like. So it's not a one and done, and that's part of the design. So I think it's just a matter of doing it so that we have the starting place of the tool.
So we are at time, but if you just have a sec, I wonder if Dawn or Ethan or Justin have any final things they'd like to share very briefly.
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to say the buck stops with the consumer advocate as far as I'm concerned about costs that the utilities incur and then expect to recover from customers. So I feel personally responsible for anything that adds to people's energy bills, absolutely. The very first utility executive I ever met was John Rowe when he ran Central Maine Power, and he later went on to run Exelon, which is one of the biggest utilities in the country, and he was once asked, well, how do you get a utility to do something? And he uttered an aphorism that I quote all the time. Anybody know what it is? The rat has to smell the cheese. So, here's the cheese, right? And so,
We brought the cheese.
and John Rowe said that. He was the head of Exelon, so it wasn't me. So the point, though, is that it is very easy to quantify the costs and criticize the utilities for incurring them, and believe me, I will. But the benefits are in some ways speculative, to be determined in the future, hard to categorize, require some imagination. So my challenge to some of you, maybe all of you, is to go out and make sure that the unregulated firms in the state and in the country and in the world are making the case for the kinds of things that they will be able to do with our data that will make our utilities services more responsive and our energy costs lower and our energy usage more conducive to the future of civilization.
So, since Dawn set a precedent of assigning homework and you've all selected yourselves by showing up to the last session of the day with both data and policy in the title, my homework to you, if you walk out, if you're thinking, how soon is this going to happen, then please contact us and let us know what you want to do with the hub so that we can incorporate all of your exciting use cases and have them top of mind as we're designing this over the next however many months.
Justin, final word to you.
So just get to the cost question, I'll close with that. So the best thing we can do for cost is to keep this approach light. So the hub, the APIs, the fairly thin and virtual system. It's not a big structure, so that keeps the cost down. And then building something that's applicable across states, a national standard we're leveraging. The approach is easily applied elsewhere. There's more customers elsewhere, by the way, so you're spreading those costs over a much broader base. You look at Eversource's customers, they're small territories in Hampshire. So if you can convince them that this works for them in Hampshire and works elsewhere, you're going to spread those costs out. So that's probably the best thing we could do is keep it light. Let the third party spend their money on applications that are built on the API, and spread those costs out on a big, broad base.
I want to just ask you to join me in thanking the panelists. There is a happy hour down the hall in 15 minutes at the bar, so.
So everyone will be
I can do it now, get it out of the way. So what are you doing? Awesome. I'm glad to hear that. So how are you getting out? I'm going to talk to you about for a second.
Yeah, just a second. Okay, so, we have that 75 megawatt.
Yes.
You know, it's getting, I mean, they haven't started building it yet. We're saying now, right now,
Community power.
yes.
If you go to town meeting before it gets built, and you approve a community power plan, then yes, and we can help you do that. Do you have a card? You have my info.
I can get that.
We should meet next week.
Okay.
And then I'd love to meet with your committee.
That's perfect. Actually, I was kind of planning. I'll let you know. I'll call you on Monday, let you know. But I was thinking of having the energy committee meeting on Wednesday.
Yeah, bring me that.
Or, you know, I mean, we can always change
The oxygen is still there, Jackie.
I could do one tonight.
Okay, all right. So, yeah, so definitely, okay, I'll call you on Monday.
Okay, that's good. And it might be tight, town meeting in March of this coming year.
Right.
But maybe we could do it.
6 months away.
Okay, great. Then let's do it. Okay. Cool. Good to meet you in person. All right, yeah.
And it was really scary to see this project.
Your files don't need it.
And I kept advocating for that, because my testimony and everything like that, is aspects of this project that have to happen, that you will not be asking about. We have more technology. And when we think about it,
We have a board.
because I was advocating, that we look at agile.
Great job.
Oh, please, I mean, we add different perspectives, and that's why it works, right? Good. I'm glad.
Nice. We have to.
And it's funny because the issues that came up were the issues that we had come up with.
We all been through all those questions. Wow, you were volunteering.
I've been volunteering.
Look at this. You gotta keep her here, right? Don't